everyone, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. I've been ill for the last couple of days, still recovering a little bit, so sorry about the delay in getting this one out. I've wanted to do it for some time, but just couldn't. And this is another one of those like the Fortune from a few episodes ago, that if you have not seen this, or if you haven't seen it in a while, I assume that most people don't come and watch the reviews until after they've seen the episode. But just in case, this is one that you want to go back and watch if you're not familiar with what's going to happen. Anyway, this one is the Revival, Season 1, Episode 17, which is called Reprisal. So this one starts with Jim heading down to the marina and meeting a former agent named Laura Ann on a boat. They share drinks, and then Laura Ann asks about the important IMF business he wanted to talk about. They banter for a bit, but then in an absolutely shocking twist, Jim pulls out a garrote wire and kills her. We next see Jim going to a pawn shop, using spy speak as usual to get the disc player. Jim is told about Laura Ann's death, and that his fingerprints were found at the scene, even though Jim was overseas on assignment at the time. Jim is so taken aback at this that he rewinds the video to make sure he heard it right. The mission is to figure out who is framing him and put an end to it before a warrant is officially issued for him in about a week's time. Jim heads to a mental hospital, inquiring about a person named Russell Acker, who he's taken to see. Acker tells us that it's been 12 years since Jim and his 3 female accomplice agents testified against him and had him declared legally insane. Jim tells him to leave the other 2 ladies alone and deal with him personally, but Acker pulls a who me act and says he's in maximum security, so there's no way he had anything to do with Laura Ann's death. But he warns Jim to tell the other 2 that they probably should be careful. We get an apartment scene where Jim tells the others that Acker was a brilliant agent, came up with many of the gadgets and techniques the IMF uses. Acker became comatose after a car accident, and when he recovered, he became different, perhaps due to brain damage, and started murdering women. And Jim and his team of women brought him to justice. Jim has realized that Acker must have an accomplice at some level. Only 5 of the staff at the institution have access to him, and $300,000 has been transferred out of Acker's trust accounts recently. Jim says he'll warn the other 2 women, one of whom looks really familiar somehow, when he can find them. The IMF go into action, with Grant tapping into the systems at the institution, and Nicholas arriving as a state inspector. The man that we saw earlier, Talbot, checks out Nicholas's credentials, and Grant intercepts the call and confirms him. He also gets the IMF a video link to Acker's cell while Nicholas checks out the personnel files. Meanwhile, Jim goes to a dance studio where we find Casey. Lisa Casey, that is, who is surprised to see him after 9 years, and Jim breaks the bad news about Laura Ann. That night, Talbot brings Acker his dinner and leaves his cell and the hallway door unlocked. Part of the dinner turns out to be a Talbot mask, and Acker activates a laser and mirror mechanism which puts a tape recording of him in his cell relayed to the surveillance cameras, allowing him to don the mask and head out of the facility using a very neat pulley elevator to escape, asking Talbot for his car keys. Talbot says he wants more money because of the risks he's taking, and Acker tells him he's in line for a big bonus soon once he finishes what he needs to do. The IMF checks out Lisa's studio for any signs of Acker's tricks. They find nothing other than some wax particles in a lock, indicating that apparently someone made a key. Acker goes to Talbot's apartment and listens to the other agent, Marilyn's answering machine, hearing Jim's voice message and callback number, which he dials from a payphone near a hotel where Marilyn is arriving. Jim dashes away as Jim meets Marilyn at the hotel, garroting her the same way, while others look on in shock, and Acker as Jim walks away into an elevator, taking off the mask. When Jim arrives, hoping to warn Marilyn, the throng points him out, and Jim drives away like a madman, barely evading the cops. Back at Jim's apartment, the team, including Lisa, watch the news of the murder, and Lisa says she's determined to bring Acker down, despite Jim wanting her to leave the country because he doesn't want another death on his conscience. Lisa, in one of the most impressive things a female IMF agent has ever done, goes to the institution to confront Acker by herself. Actually, the better word is taunt, as Lisa calls him a coward who doesn't scare her and tells him she's not running away. Grant analyzes the surveillance tapes and realizes that Acker is using a tape. In his cell, Talbot visits Acker for this next time out, asking for his payoff, but Acker quickly garrots him too. Acker as Talbot heads out as Max goes to Talbot's apartment looking for hidden devices and finds one, leading to Acker's secret room. He summons Jim and they find his picture shrine to all his victims, as well as Jim masks. Jim picks one of them up, activating a device with a video from Acker, figuring he would eventually find his lair and congratulating him on finding all the evidence he needs to exonerate himself, indicating that there's one more piece of information he'll find on his home computer. He then speaks as the voice on tape would, indicating the secretary will disavow Jim, and the room will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Jim and Max are able to avoid the blast that occurs, and Jim sends Max to go protect Lisa while he trails Acker, who is at Jim's apartment putting a substance on the keyboard. Lisa is worried about the risks Jim is taking, but the others remind her that Acker's plan is clearly to frame Jim, not to kill him. Jim returns to his apartment where he hears Acker's voice through relay devices and the lights go out. Jim touches a keyboard and is incapacitated by the substance. Acker enters from the balcony, reminding Jim that he was the one who discovered that contact anesthetic and puts on a Jim mask for his remaining task, leaving behind a garrote wire as framing evidence and heading away. When he does, Jim gets up and Nicholas appears, telling us that they were prepared for Acker's trick, and Jim tells the others to be ready for his arrival. Acker as Jim appears, telling everyone that Acker had yet another car accident, and the police found evidence to clear Jim, so the ordeal is over. The others leave Acker as Jim and Lisa alone in the studio, where a bunch of mirrors are set up for some reason, allowing them to chat for a bit, as Acker as Jim talks about how we all have touches of madness within us, and Acker and Jim are almost the same person. Acker starts to choke Lisa, but she is able to partially rip the mask off of him, as Acker starts shooting and trying to escape, but the IMF shut all the doors and corner him, showing him the video footage they just took of him trying to kill Lisa. And Acker is shaken by seeing himself in all the mirrors that surround him, and then goes into a crazy fit, insisting it wasn't him, it was Jim, and collapses on the floor as the IMF leave weirdly. Mission accomplished. This episode has so much that needs to be discussed and analyzed, I guess. I can't think of a better word right now. That I don't want to give a grade to it right away. It's one of those that I feel I kind of have to talk out a little bit. I often comment on episodes that are unique. Well, for all the times I've called an episode unique, wow, you can't get a whole heck of a lot more unique than this one. I remember the first time I saw this episode. My recollection is I saw it in 1989 when it first aired. And for some reason, I got distracted, maybe changing the channel or whatever during a commercial, and I missed the ending. And I was kicking myself for it. But I was just absolutely gobsmacked. How could you not be? Watching Peter Graves murder an IMF agent. Not once, but twice. But this is the first time when he does it. There is nothing anybody could do to prepare you for that as a Mission Impossible fan. Had the show been more popular at the time, that's like to use a Game of Thrones reference, that's like Red Wedding level, just out there. Nothing can prepare you for it if you don't know it's coming. So that part was just absolutely tremendous. You just have to go in to say, okay, I'm interested. How could you not? When Jim goes and rewinds the tape, he has never done this before, and I'm 99.999% certain that for the rest of the revival, he does not do it again. That's how special and important this is. Your fingerprints, Jim, were found at the scene. And he's just like, just like we weren't prepared for seeing what we were seeing. Obviously, Jim wasn't either. And also, uniquely, the voice on tape says, your mission, which I feel you must accept, rather than if you choose to accept it. It's not like anybody else is going to do this for you, Jim. You got to do this yourself. I really, really thought that was very neat. So that's what I have to say about the uniqueness of this episode. Moving on to what I think is quite good. The Russell Acker character is likely the most competent villain we have ever had on the show. And I think that also covers the original series. The only antagonist or villain that I think is in the same league might be Stefan Miklos from the season 3 episode, The Mind of Stefan Miklos. Somebody who is right there on Jim Phelps's level. Somebody who can't necessarily be played or, tricked or confused or whatever, or even if because he's aware of all of those tricks, he invented some of them. However, here's my problem with the Acker character. I think that David Cameron as Acker, he's good. He's a good actor. He's very prolific if you look him up on IMDb. However, I think the direction, meaning the whoever is directing this episode, I don't like the fact that the director apparently told him to take on this affected voice, right? Where he's always kind of like half grumbling and Jimbo and that sort of thing. And it just seems so fake and weird. I would have much preferred, now maybe the director obviously had his or her reasons, but playing it straight, maybe more of like a Hannibal Lecter sort of figure would have been much better. Somebody who has it could have been even more of like kind of a monotone voice, just somebody who kind of, portrays it in just more evil rather than kind of unhinged. I get that the unhinged thing is part of it, but I think it would have been better that way. There's just something not quite right in the way that David Cameron, I think, is directed here. In looking it up, the director of this episode is a fellow named Rob Stewart, who's directed a whole lot of things. He also directed the 2 more episodes this season. He actually directed Spy a few episodes ago, and he also directed The Lions. That's good, decent episodes with decent characters. All of those episodes had their issues, but that's really not the director's thing. That was more the writer's thing. I also wonder why Rob Stewart directed Peter Graves, apparently, to play Jim Phelps very kind of wooden. This is the episode in which if Peter Graves as Jim Phelps is going to act emotional, it would have actually made sense. We've seen it happen before. In the first episode, The Killer, Jim gets righteously emotional when he comes kind of face to face with the guy who killed his protege. We also saw a few episodes ago in The Fortune where Jim gets angry and physical with Amelia Barazon for killing Casey Randall. And here, he doesn't really show a lot of emotion, which is a little bit weird. I don't really know what Rob Stewart, the director, was kind of going for with that. I can't think of specifics on how to improve it, at least not the Jim side of it. I think with Acker, had the evil rather the unhinged come across, I think that would have been better. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some people prefer the unhinged part of it. I have more to say about that in a bit. Moving on to what else I found to be good. Oh my gosh, how wonderful was it to see Lynda Day George again. She looks great. This is one of her last roles that she actually played. I assume that she came back because the producers, and probably Peter Graves himself, asked her, hey, would you like to come back for like a one-shot deal? And she agreed. Yeah, and then looking at IMDb again, Lynda Day George, her last TV appearance before this one was in 1986 on a show called Black's Magic, which I vaguely recall. So, you know, she had taken little parts here and there, and she had basically been done, I think, at that point. But she came back in 1989 to replay her role as Lisa Casey. For sure, the most amazing moment in this episode for me is when she goes and confronts Acker in his cell just by herself. Not with Jim standing behind her, none of that. She goes by herself and taunts him, calls him a coward, says, you're not a real man, are you? All of that. And that was just absolutely badass. Loved it so much. I had actually forgotten about that one scene before I went back to watch this again for the purposes of the review. I'll also say, just to kind of wrap up the good that's in this episode, I like the fact that the authors and director, the writers, everybody involved, did maintain some suspense pretty much towards, throughout the episode until the end. How are they going to pull this off? There's more to say about that, but to say that we are absolutely, just from the beginning, taken in and want to see, how are they going to get out of this is, it is an understatement. Moving on to stuff that I found to be strange in this one. First of all, I can't help but think, why in the world? This doesn't necessarily have to do, with this episode, but just, with the revival overall. Why in the world could they not have picked a name for Terry Markwell's character other than Casey? Now, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously. They probably didn't anticipate that Lynda Day George was going to come back and, reprise, that's also a reprisal, reprise her character. I get that. But, you've already used the name. They didn't call her Cinnamon or Dana or anything like that, right? Why would they call her Casey? I don't get it. What would have been wrong with Sarah Randall or Kelly Randall or Julie Randall or whatever? There's thousands of names for women. Why does it have to be Casey? And that just messes up what would this episode, and like I said, one of the things that maybe you couldn't have predicted, but bothersome. I'm sure it bothers a lot of you guys out there too. Also, something that I found weird in the episode was Nicholas goes into the mental institution and looks at the personnel files. Okay, I mean, he does some other things too. He takes a look at the surveillance system and all of that kind of stuff. Nothing becomes of it, though. I would have expected them to at least, have a little bit of dialogue about how Talbot's likely our man because he seems to have come into some money or whatever. That was just kind of strange that not more came of that piece of the plan. Moving on to stuff that is not good. This is an episode where the IMF is reacting rather than acting. That is somewhat out of necessity because of the nature of the plot. I went into the, reviewing the revival thinking to myself that, you know what, this I'm going to say is the best episode and nothing is even going to come close. Frankly, that was my thought process as I came into this. I would still say that this is my favorite episode to watch just because of the unique nature of it for the reasons that I've discussed. But that is a problem. And having gone over almost the entire series now, that is something that is bothersome when the IMF reacts rather than acts. It's a little out of it's a little bit out of my comfort zone, really. I much prefer it when they have to formulate a plan and then execute it. Also not good. Jane Badler is sadly a placeholder here, which is really, really terrible. I think it's pretty obvious why, because the focus had to be more on Lynda Day George. I get that. It's understandable, but I'm not happy about it because, Jane Badler deserves better. And she gets better as things go on. So I'm not going to complain too much, but I didn't like that here. The biggest problem with this episode, it's not really a surprise what I'm about to say here. This ending is just not good. It borders on nonsensical, frankly. We get Acker, after failing to kill Lisa, and then being shown video of himself taking off the mask saying, haha, we got you. He takes some shots, errant shots at, things that are going on, and then he starts looking at himself in the mirror and I guess doesn't like what he sees or something like that. And then he just collapses and goes unhinged. And again, I used the word unhinged before, about how that's how the director asked him to be. And maybe this is the reason why, because this is basically the story that they wanted to tell and the play they wanted to run, so to speak. But it's just such an unsatisfying ending. There should really be more to it than that. This deserves so much better than just one of those, okay, we got you endings, which was so common in the later seasons. Especially in season 7. I commented about some of those endings, in those reviews. I think I can't come up with a really, really awesome ending for this, but I can think of a few things that I think would have improved things. We have Acker doing a little bit of a soliloquy as he's kind of wandering around, just trying to pick his spot where he can, get behind Lisa and that sort of thing. Even though she really tries hard to turn her back to him and, give him every opportunity because obviously she wants to get this over with. He just starts talking about, the nature of madness. And other foolishness about, because he's playing Jim, Acker's not that different from me, I think I share a lot of things in common with him. I really think that what would have improved things is, again, rather than being unhinged, being a little bit more evil. If he had said something, if the tone of his voice changed a little bit, and if he had said something related to Lisa's taunt, one thing about Russell Acker, he's not a coward, right? Alluding to exactly what Lisa said earlier. Because, of course, we, the audience, know that it's Acker as Jim Phelps. But he obviously doesn't know that she knows that. I think that would have been better. Again, I think Acker being evil rather than unhinged, as I said, I don't want to keep repeating myself, would have made the episode a lot better, especially at the ending time. I'm also thinking, with what I've already said about, the direction of David Cameron and Peter Graves in this episode, it really seems to me, I'm speculating a little bit, but it seems like an educated guess based on what else we've seen this season, that the director looked at the story and said, okay, if this is the ending that we've got, then this is how these guys need to be. I say that again only to kind of set up the idea that it seems in this episode that the IMF had a lot of other opportunities to trap Russell Acker. Sadly, Grant discovers the fake tape and mirror setup that Acker has created in his cell a little bit too late, I guess, to try to do anything to stop him until that ship has sailed a little bit. I don't know why they didn't maybe put some extra surveillance around his cell or around the hallway of his cell, because then they would have seen Talbot or somebody, well, obviously Talbot, they would have seen Talbot, going back and forth into his cell at the key times and all of those sorts of things, and they would have seen Acker walking out. Maybe that would have been just a little bit too obvious, but Grant has done things like that before. How hard would it have been to set, given that they gaslight people's bedrooms and things like that on a fairly regular basis to put up little holographic images or whatever. How hard would it be to put a hidden camera in there? But again, that would have made it a really, really short episode, I suppose. Again, the whole episode seems geared and written towards the idea of we have to have this ending where Jim gets video footage of Acker impersonating Jim, having the mask ripped off his face and trying to kill Lisa. That I don't know really what else to say about that. And it was just kind of this, task with blinders on it that they missed so many other things. Max could have grabbed Jim and they could have ripped the mask off. Wouldn't that have been enough evidence that, hey, this guy's been impersonating Jim Phelps? I don't know. Grant, I already mentioned that Grant could have set up another camera around Acker's cell somehow. There were other ways of getting this done, but again, the whole episode seems so focused on getting to that point. I don't necessarily have that much of a problem with it, but the rest of the stuff around it, again, the way that Acker's character is played, and then him just kind of collapsing because he failed, there's really something lacking there, and it just doesn't come together properly. In terms of a callback for this episode, it's tough to come up with one. I was sort of thinking about Kidnap a little bit, where Jim is in trouble, and, the rest of the team kind of has to save him, in a sense. It's sort of the case, but not really the case here. Jim drives most of the action in this one. I think maybe the better callback, a little bit better than Kidnap, would be The Town. Because at the very least, I can't think of any other episode other than this one and The Town where I said to myself, when Jim is actually in real trouble, and I just said, whoa, how in the world are they going to get out of this? So that to me is the better callback. In terms of a final grade for this episode, as I mentioned, I went into reviewing the Revival series saying to myself that this one I was going to give an A+ for sure. However, because of the reasons that I mentioned, no, it definitely does not deserve an A+. I'm going to settle on an A-, a low A- for this one, because it just the ending, so much hangs on the ending here. And it's just the kind of thing where, they played it up so much and then really kind of let us down. I guess you could say it's kind of on the border of A-, B+. I guess I'll have to see how that shakes out when I rank the other episodes. And maybe I'm being a little bit more generous than I should with that A-, but still to me, this is my favorite episode of the Revival. Not to say that it's the best, because it's not, but it still is my favorite, just because of the amount of suspense that it creates and the uniqueness of the episode, and I'm going to stick with that. And I think that's it. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. It's much appreciated. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments. I would love to hear people's comments about some of the things that I have mentioned. What do you think? Would it have been better if Acker was played as more of like a straight-edged evil character? Or was it okay for him to be the unhinged sort of guy? or anything else you care to say about this episode. This is one that I think deserves a lot of comments and discussion, and I really hope that we get that. So as I mentioned, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please leave your comments. Thank you again, and I will see you next time.